Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to start off by assuming that everyone here agrees that there was a problem with the climate and that it's caused by greenhouse gas emissions that we produce, and we've got to stop it. And we'll jump straight to talking about how. By the way, do I have a timekeeper? I'm told I'm limited to time 10 minutes.
Just do your thing.
All right. Okay. We've probably heard a lot of the technical solutions to climate change, you know, to take public transit or ride a bike, or you may have heard to things like putting in a geothermal heat pump, get your heat from the ground instead of natural gas. But all of these, trying to address it through individual actions is necessarily going to fail. Because for one thing, a lot of the real solutions, like the big solutions like buying an electric car or a geothermal heat pump, are really expensive. And when it gets to the big ticket items, people inevitably almost inevitably choose the lower price option. And I know that because I tried starting a company putting in geothermal heat pumps. And I spoke to a lot of people who said all the right things, who said they were environmentalists, they were really concerned about their grandkids and climate change, and they wanted to minimize their carbon emissions. And I'm like, great, one of the best things you can do is get rid of that gas furnace and put in a geothermal heat pump. But it is more expensive. And they say, oh, well then, I can't do it. So, you know, in practice, people do steer towards the lowest cost option, and that's why we need price signals. The other reason why individual actions don't work is because every time that someone chooses to ride a bike, to boycott oil effectively, they're helping make oil cheaper. And someone else will then see that as encouragement to buy a bigger SUV, and someone else will burn the oil that you don't use. So we do need international agreements for countries to take government action to get everyone to agree to collectively reduce our emissions to have a real impact on climate change. And the most economically efficient way to do that is through price signals. There are a few different ways of doing that, but the two, I think, best ones, the most popular ones that are talked about nowadays is cap and trade or fee and dividend. Some people also talk about carbon tax, and fee and dividend and carbon tax are somewhat related. But you know, the idea behind a carbon fee and dividend is to put a price on fossil fuels at the wellhead, or as close to the wellhead as possible. That will increase the price of fossil fuels and everything that is made with fossil fuels and everything that is made through energy inefficient processes. So that will discourage all of those things. The price would start off relatively small, but you want it to rise rise predictably over time to the point where carbon emissions are reduced to nearly nothing, because we do need to go carbon negative across the world around 2050, 2060 or so. Under the fee and dividend plan, all of the revenues from the carbon fee would be returned to individuals like yourself through equal dividend checks, which will help the transition to the clean economy. It helps everyone, you know, gives everyone a bit of extra money to pay for that higher fuel price until they can get around to buying that electric car. And then they'll be they'll come out financially ahead of the people who didn't buy the electric car. The other big plan that's talked about is cap and trade systems, where a system of permits are auctioned off to polluters, and polluters are then allowed to trade around those permits. And if you have a permit, you're allowed to put out the carbon emissions. If you don't, well, then you'll get fined. And the amount of permits that's available for auction gets reduced year after year until it drives down to nearly zero around, hopefully, 2050, 2060. So the difference between these two plans is that in one case, with the fee and dividend system, you have a predictable price on your fossil fuels, but you have variable reductions in emissions. You know, on a good economic year, on a boom year, you might still have emissions that climb. But overall, if the price rises, then on average, the emissions will go down. In a cap and trade system, you have a predictable decline in emissions, which can be useful for meeting international agreements, but you're going to have variations in prices. The prices could swing from very low to very high, and that can make it hard to run a business. And because of that unpredictability of price under a cap and trade system, I think that's why the fee and dividend system is better. Also, the enforcement of a cap and trade system is much harder than the enforcement of a fee and dividend system. With a cap and trade system, you've got to track down all of the polluters and figuring out how much they're emitting, and they have systems of free allocations and offsets, and the public doesn't understand it, so they trust the government to take care of it, and the government is then going to be susceptible from taking some bribes under the table to corrupt the system. With a fee and dividend system, it's a much cleaner system where that is going to be easier to enforce. In fact, we already do something similar in terms of collecting royalties. We already measure all of the fossil fuels that come out of the ground and charge money on those. Now it's just a matter of setting the price according to the carbon content and increasing it in a predictable manner. So there's a lot less room for corruption, and there's a lot less costs of enforcement with a fee and dividend system. There's also it also matters what happens to the revenue. With a cap and trade system, typically there are different variations out there, but typically with a cap and trade system, the money goes back to general government revenues, money from the original auctions. That can be all right. Governments do need money to run our services, but these days the giving money to government is unpopular, and that can make schemes like this, or a straight carbon tax that gives the tax to general government revenues, that can make these systems politically unstable. The Australia recently passed a cap and trade, and a few years ago passed a cap and trade and carbon tax system, and then a few years later another government came in and repealed it. So in order to have a long-term solution to climate change, and climate change is a long-term problem, you want a system that is going to be acceptable to a broad section of society, so it's acceptable to all of the political parties. We have to pay attention to the concerns of the right-wingers. And this is one of the benefits of the fee and dividend system, that all of the money goes back to the people through dividends. It can help in poverty reduction, which is often a concern of the right, and it provides lots of transparency, and it provides an incentive to the individual voters to keep that system, because they don't want that dividend check to go away. I'm sure I've reached 10 minutes by now.
I think so.
All right.
That's all right. It's not a strict time limit.
I feel I've given a good overview, so I'd be happy to yield.
Well, actually, I totally agree with you. So thank you very much.